Hello, everyone. Today I'm with Dr. Bonnie Bright and Dr. Christophe Morin, and we are going to be talking about AI and the soul. Bonnie is a depth psychologist, and Christophe is a neuroscientist and a media psychologist. And we're going to be talking about the intersection between AI and the soul. And I wondered whether maybe Christophe, as we were just talking before the podcast started, if maybe you could bring us up to where are we standing? What's this time we're standing at? And could you start us off there and tell us a bit of your own story as well?
Yes, of course. Well, first, thank you for inviting me for this. I have been working with AI for nearly 15 years now. As a media psychologist, my first passion was to decode the subconscious response to advertising, movies, which could not be explored by simply talking to people. The speed at which our visual system works is far higher than the speed of our quote unquote consciousness. So my research was indirectly about understanding consciousness and using neuroscience specifically, which was quite, shall we say, controversial at the beginning, to fully expand our understanding of why we like certain narratives, why we don't, and so forth. And so, in that process, of course, I was involved in a lot of computational needs because it's one thing to ask people a question, do you like this, yes or no? It's a very simple way to do the math on a spreadsheet. But if you're monitoring brain responses 300 times per second, you're getting massive amount of data, which humanly you can't really process unless you have the power of AI. So AI for me initially was a computational machine that could crunch data very, very quickly and ultimately reveal patterns in the data. And computer vision, which is really the singly most probably important step in the history of AI, was about decoding images and decoding scenes and finding patterns in the pixels. That eventually gave rise to another form of AI, and I'll fast forward and simplify, called generative AI. And what generative AI was able to do is go beyond the recognition of just an object, but start essentially producing content based on the review of that data that could look like a human writing or creating an image. And so these new developments have profound implications in terms of what we can do, but also how we see ourselves as humans, because we are clearly experiencing for the first time in our evolution direct competition for tasks that we believe were only performed by humans or only could be performed by humans. So if that's enough of an introduction, I'm happy to go beyond that since I teach the subject and there are multiple aspects to it, but maybe to set up the tone, that's hopefully enough for now.
Well, maybe let's go to Bonnie. And Bonnie, what are some of we're talking about the intersection of the soul and AI. So where is that intersection? What have you been thinking about? And I should add, before we go on, that you guys are running a retreat very soon. And it's not far away, is it? It's a week or so, I think, on this topic. So it's something you've been thinking about for some time and been diving into. So where is the intersection and where are you coming from? And what have you been thinking about lately?
Yeah, well, I've been fascinated by technology for a long time. It's something that has always intrigued me. And in fact, when I was doing my doctoral dissertation, I had a real interest in potentially doing it on social media because it was kind of the thing that was up and coming at the time. Ultimately, I made the decision not to do that because I knew inherently that any research that I could do on that and writing would be basically obsolete within just a few years. And sure enough, that is absolutely true. So, what is interesting is that, in fact, my introduction into the world of soul happened rather spontaneously. In 2006, I was attending a retreat, which I initially had attended because I was working in the corporate world and was hoping to get some information and understanding that I could bring back into the corporate world on essentially on personality typologies. So this retreat was for the Enneagram, which
Mm.
for those who don't know, it is a system of 9 different typologies. And once you can begin to understand those 9 different typologies, you can really begin to understand what is your greatest shadow and what is your greatest gift. And so it was very powerful work. And that particular retreat, we were doing a lot of somatic work, which is quite interesting because I've always considered myself of the 3 triads in the Enneagram, they relate to head centered, heart centered, or gut centered as a driver for us in our lives. And I've always related to head centered. So I had never paid that much attention to the somatic or body based piece of things. So we
Mm.
were doing a lot of movement work, a lot of different kinds of things. Ultimately, we did an exercise that many people who are watching this will probably be familiar with called holotropic breath work, which was created by Stanford
Stand
Groff.
rough. Yeah.
Exactly. And that was created in order to be able to bring people into what he might call a non-ordinary state of awareness in
Mm.
order to get some downloads from what I now know to call the collective unconscious, as Jung called it. And of course,
Mm.
I had none of that terminology at the time. I was very green, even in the field of psychology, and
Well,
did not know
just
a lot
just
about
to
any of
butt in
that.
for 1 second, Bonnie, what were you
Mhm.
doing in the corporate world? What was your gig?
I was in marketing. And
Right.
that was, I initially started as a buyer in retail. And so I was buying products and made the move over to marketing, probably because it had somewhat of a psychological, creative side to it, because those were the opportunities that I think my soul was inherently interested in the most. So if I was going to be in the corporate world, it was a really good place to be. I
Mm.
ultimately ended up doing a lot of graphic design and creative things like that. So it fed my soul to some extent, but it
Mm.
was, now I know much more of a surface level kind of experience.
Mm.
And of course, what happened for me at this retreat was that I had this profound mystical experience that I know to have been initiated directly from that experience of holotropic breath work. And that mystical experience was, it was a long time ago, and I still struggle sometimes to talk about it as we do in such what Jung called numinous experiences, and experiences that are really of such mystery and awe, and we might even say divinity, that we can't describe them because we don't have the words for them.
Mm.
But in this particular mystical experience, it changed my worldview so profoundly that I came back from the retreat and was really, I'm not going to say not able to function, but I really had a hard
Yeah.
time coming back into everyday life and trying to figure out what it meant for me, because what was revealed to me was I had a felt sense of myself as now I know to be what I would call my soul self. So, in my client work and in the school that I run for the Institute for Soul-Centered Psychology and Coaching, that soul self is opposed to our ego self. And the ego self, of course, is the everyday, it's kind of like the engine that runs us and gets us around. It's like the driver of a limousine, right? It gets us to where we need to be going,
Yeah.
but it doesn't have the map or the GPS where we need to go. So,
Mm.
in that experience, I experienced this just profound sense of awe, and even felt myself as a different kind of energy than my physical body, than my everyday ego self knew myself to be.
Mm.
And that plunged me into actually quite a lot of despair because my first thought when I felt that was, am I that? How can I possibly be that? I still had my faculties, I was still able to think, but
Mm.
I was really in this transcendent state. And what I saw in that moment was and the way I guess it was kind of phrased to myself by myself was, what have we done to ourselves? How can we, meaning as human beings, live with all of the suffering and all of the limits that we put on ourselves when in fact that is not at all who we are. And so when I went back, I didn't know how to take that in. I didn't know how to handle that. And what that did was put me on a quest, a profound quest to understand what it was that my experience was about. And that led me directly to working with Stan Grof quite a bit in holotropic breath work, and led me right into depth psychology, Jungian psychology, where I immediately started a master's program and then went on to do my doctorate. And so
at Pacifica.
yes, at Pacifica. So, and at Pacifica, I had the opportunity really, truly to do a lot of, well, to have a lot of conversations about technology and what was going on at the time. And ultimately, again, even though I decided not to pursue that in writing at the time, I was very much pursuing it at the same time in a parallel kind of way. And my doctoral dissertation ended up being on what I call culture collapse disorder, which you might recognize is a takeoff on the term colony collapse disorder. And colony collapse disorder is referring to the mass vanishing of honeybees, which is something that started not long before I was doing that work. And it was just a phenomenon that just compelled me to try to understand what was going on. And the more I got into that, the more I began to understand our relationship with nature and eco-psychology. Again, things that I had just not consciously explored much before. And then again, parlaying that into our contemporary culture worldwide, essentially, for us Westerners at least, that could allow us to live like we are living and find out how to apply soul, much as Christophe was saying, in this case, to apply soul to the values and the difficulties and challenges that our culture is facing.
And so specifically, when we think about this huge breakthrough with AI, like there's pros and cons, aren't there, in a way? Like maybe as far as the soul goes, there's pros and cons with this huge break. Like this morning, I was reading James Hillman's take on this, or what I would say could be applied to this. He was talking in mythic figures about Hermes, and he said it's like, sometimes it's like we've got an overdose of Hermes, and there's that great side where you get this access to this incredible, like if you're interested in anything, you can access so much. But in another way, there's this kind of overdosing, it can seem. But for you personally, what do you see as what are the pros and what are the cons of this technological environment we now find ourselves in?
Are you asking that? Sorry.
And then I'll swap to Christophe a little later.
Oh yeah, sorry,
Yeah.
I missed that.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
No, I was going to say, I think you can speak to that probably to introduce it way more than I can. So,
yeah, let me suggest, and of course there are pros and cons. There's no question about it. But more importantly, there are deeply human challenges accepting the existence of a form of intelligence, which I think wrongly is called artificial, and suggests that it can function on its own. And that's, of course, the vision of most dystopian movies about what will happen to our species. And I'm not saying there's not risk. It could, but at least for the time being, I prefer to refer to AI as augmented intelligence. And I think if we frame it that way, we then recognize that it is another tool, meaning that it requires human thinking, and frankly, you get what you put in, and therefore there are really truly exceptional ways to partner with AI, and understanding that it's still like a child without much of boundaries. And that's part of the flaws in the way AI has been introduced. It's been introduced way too fast with people who are extremely naive, I think, about how far people can deal with that much knowledge. Now, as a neuroscientist, this won't surprise you. I can tell you that our ability to absorb as much content is extremely small. I mean, our brain has not changed to accommodate massive processing of information that we can meet in just about 20 minutes. The amount of information that we would meet our entire lifetime 100 years ago. And our brain has not changed in 100 years to accommodate that much volume. So I think the sheer volume makes us really not appreciate and also know how to communicate and connect to the tool. But if we think about augmentation, I do see, as I share in Open and in my course, an opportunity to raise our level of consciousness, which is, as you, I hope, agree, is one of the biggest priorities for humans today, as well as, which is one of the biggest topic of passion for me, raise our neuroplasticity, meaning our capacity to actually question fundamentally more than we typically do, and be open and ready to challenge many of the answers that we've explored for sometimes hundreds of years.
Mm. And have you got something to add to that, Bonnie?
Well, I just might add that, coming from a soulful perspective, that I do believe, as Christophe stated, that this is a tool that we all have access to and is going to help our world to evolve in many, many ways. Again, the speed at which that is happening is very difficult. Jung, even 60 years ago, was talking about the speed at which technology was developing and bringing things into, kids in schools in villages that just wasn't really, that he didn't feel that they were really ready for. So he could see that before it was even in the pipeline. And of course, that speed at which we are acting is one of the biggest challenges in our time. And that was even before AI, before we all had access to that. Soul requires us to slow down. It requires us to be with ourselves, introspective, in reverie. And that really doesn't serve us when we are going so fast that we have lost that ability.
It's
So
paradoxical, isn't it? It's on one hand, one wants the access uh, to all that there is available, and to be able to question and to become more open, as Christophe says. But I find with myself sometimes it's like I often go. I'm not far from the beach. I go for a walk down the beach, and I always leave my phone, leave everything, and it's almost like I think Stan Groff talks about a technology of the sacred. It's almost like they both need to grow. It's kind of like the slowing down and the emptying and the letting go and the reverie and the simplicity, almost, I'd say, on one side, is a way of digesting and what is it? Working with the material. So that there's this wonderful kind of stimulus and input and knowledge, and then the technology of the sacred is the soul making of it or something.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say, there are 100 ways probably more that I can think of that we can use AI in a soulful way to be able to reflect back to us or to identify patterns that are at work in our lives, archetypes. You could feed journal entries from years ago and really let it look for patterns in your life and identify what are the archetypes that are at work. What is the main archetype that you're carrying? I mean, this is something that I work with clients all the time, and Jung was a really powerful believer in that. I think the question for us at this time, at least for me, is are we going to use AI as a tool for consciousness, for our spiritual evolution? Are we going to be able to engage with it in a conscious way, that we can really be helped in our inquiry and also in our capacity to be able to move more quickly into those states of consciousness that are really required for us to be able to not only just survive what's coming, but to survive, all of the other things that we're facing in our world today, climate change not being the least of those, and poverty, and, all the differences in social systems and all of that. So I think the other alternative is that it can be used as a spiritual bypass. People might just dive into it, and we've already seen a lot of that happening where, they kind of outsource their own spirituality, maybe not even knowing that that's what they need or that that's what they're doing.
And,
So it's a profound
creative
dichotomy.
spirituality and creativity may be.
Very much so.
And
Absolutely.
I'm very scared of becoming attached to Siri. That's why I've never kind of used Siri here, because the blurring between fact and fiction sometimes, or the attachment to people that aren't people, or
Yeah.
that are avatars, whatever. I mean, how do we discriminate between fact and fiction?
Well, if I may, that's yet another challenge with the production of generated AI. As you, I'm sure, have started to notice, it's becoming less and less obvious to discriminate what is in fact produced by humans and what is produced by machines. Now, let's not forget that we as humans should take responsibility for producing the machine. And so, the knowledge that these large language models, which are the names for what is contained and categorized in chunks, in billions of chunks, is knowledge produced by humans. I mean, all AI has done is essentially create a huge inventory of human knowledge from which it can mathematically identify threads, identify patterns, which then can be organized and presented in a format that mimics human work as it has been done for thousands of years. So we are at that point of lack of ability to separate. And I think that's what's creating the existential crisis we're in, where some humans feels deeply troubled and threatened by being replaced, essentially, while others, I'll put myself into that category, feel the excitement of augmenting the work that I've done for many years, accelerating the production of, I think, new material that I probably would have never been able to even begin in my lifespan.
Yeah.
And so it's this dance that will require people, hopefully like us, that we need to acknowledge, that we need to honor. And there's a lot of education, a lot of coaching, a lot of psychology that will be needed to support and help people see that potential and not go into the trap of that dopamine rush where you just feel the excitement of having answers that somehow seem to, appear so magical.
Mm. And Bonnie, can you add to that?
Yeah, at the same time, we are indeed facing a real crisis. I don't think anybody can argue that. And those of us who have done a lot of our own inner work, transformational work, worked on our childhood traumas, worked on, the things that cause us the most suffering and the most pain, to really try and understand those and to be with those and then to let go of those. As we come out the other side, we have new awareness and understanding of who we really are, of what we are being called to do in this lifetime. We understand that there is a meaning for everything, that each thing that is presented to us is basically, I like to look at it as an initiation. How can we move through this? Survive it, yes, but to survive it with a new kind of wisdom that emerges as we go through these challenges consciously, looking at each moment to say, what is here for me in this moment? What can I learn here? What am I supposed to be practicing right now that can help me to be a better person, a better individual, more loving, can give me more joy, more creativity, more freedom? And so when we can find meaning, which of course is the whole idea of soul, soul is what makes meaning. If we can find meaning in what is happening to us, then we do have that capacity to transcend what is going on, what we are facing, to tap into some of the resources and that spiritual evolution that I was mentioning earlier, that Christophe was just talking about, the ability to be more creative, to have more fulfillment, to create more of what we are interested in and what can also potentially help others. You know, learning, creativity, and service are three pretty powerful parts of us as human beings that if we can tap into those, we can definitely have some impact on other people's lives. But the challenge is a lot of people out there have not yet done their own inner work. And if anybody's listening to this that doesn't know what I mean by that, that right there is a beginning. It's a call from soul. The only way we can be empowered to face what is coming is to, I think, do as much of our inner work as we can, as intensively as possible as we can, so that we can find out who we are, so that we can learn what it is that what are the archetypes that are driving our lives, and what are our gifts in the world? What are we here to contribute? What are we here to do? So I think it, again, it just comes back to that dichotomy, but there is a lot of work that's going to have to happen in the meantime. And as people lose jobs and find it more and more difficult to navigate the fast pace of what's going on, it's going to be causing a lot of people a lot of suffering. And it doesn't mean that it's not going to be discriminatory, right? Everybody is going to suffer in some way, shape, or form. It's just that those who have the context, especially a context from a soul-centered perspective, as I like to look at it, that will make it so much easier in the long run for them to not only navigate it, but to also, as I mentioned, thrive, because thriving is us stepping into those gifts.
And it may be that it allows, whilst there could be dislocation or whatever, but it also might allow more time for that inner work, soul work. Sometimes you hear in Indigenous societies, I think in Australian Aboriginal culture, it was said that 2/3 of the time was spent on, ritual processes, religious processes, spiritual processes. And
Time.
in the Industrial Revolution, that went down to what for us, almost zero, maybe. So maybe now there's more time to allow, like when COVID came, and there was all of a sudden it was like a lack of external demand for that period of time, which actually allowed, it seemed to me, more inner work, creativity. It's not necessarily a negative thing that.
No, you're absolutely right. And going back to my own experience during COVID, where I was grounded, like, most plane pilots were. I was traveling extensively all the time, but in that busyness, I didn't realize the extent to which I needed to do the work that Bonnie is talking about. I needed to pause, I needed to reflect, and COVID, frankly, was a huge gift for me. As well as an existential crisis, because I only knew myself in front of crowds or groups sharing, my teachings, and couldn't even conceive that I could play a different role.
You had your foot on the pedal, so to speak. And
exactly. And it's during that pause, that forced pause, which started with real struggle emotionally and spiritually, but eventually morphed into this initiation through which I went through death and rebirth and found a new meaning in my own soul blueprint that completely changed my life, completely changed my my coping mechanism, going back to the reference to the Enneagram, in profound ways. So yes, we are witnessing a lot of people in stress, anxiety, and sometimes real despair, but hopefully we can hold and support many of the people that are yet not able to see that from the lenses of soul-centered psychology and consider this to be a punishment or consider themselves victims of the evolution of our tech, when in fact it might be the biggest invitation to grow, to evolve by being more soulful.
And Christophe, now what do you call soul work, and how do you view creativity? When you were saying you went through that kind of change, what is this new view that you have towards it?
Wow, that's a big question. I was going to say actually two aspects that I think were profoundly transformational for me with AI is one, give me a more visual understanding of my dreams, my work with plant medicine. And that's why I wanted in Open, the book, to demonstrate how by just sharing the narrative of a journey, and you mentioned earlier your interest in that or past experiences, it's very, very challenging at the rational level, at the ego level, to create the thread of an experience that comes from, holotropic breath work or a session with ayahuasca. And AI revealed itself as this kind of oracle for me that could make more sense than my conscious mind could by just entering the journal entries and asking for images that could somehow represent important aspects of my soul. So that's number one. And my interest in narrative has been fueled by, of course, the interest that I have in media in general and movies and commercials, which without some sort of storyline do not have any impact whatsoever on our brain. And so in the study of mental health, we know also too well how important narratives are, understanding your story, owning your story, and more importantly, knowing that the part of the story that seems either ugly or dysfunctional are actually some of the most important teaching moments, right? So all this work, whether it's images or narratives, I believe AI has a huge opportunity to help and support people. Now, I seem very gung-ho, irrespective of the cost that it has on our environment and so on. Of course, I am well aware and I am hoping that humans are going to find very quickly ways to justify that AI is ultimately going to not just solve, human-based problems like death, or at least, disease that could be easily now solved by AI, but also climate change issues and world issues that we continue to see on CNN and other channels are not exactly demonstrating our ability to be good humans in general.
When I think, there's an old term, co-creator. I think I first read it in Gene Houston a long time ago. Rather than just a consumer of images, how do we become a co-creator? Or that's what I'm getting from what you're saying too. That
totally, yeah, and that's why I said
working
I
with
consider
images.
it a partner more than just an outsourcing solution. And the work that we've done, Bonnie and I, in respect to this retreat and other podcasts, is to help people see more practically, more more as a practice than just really be scared or unsure what to do and so on. And there are very, very important also ways to deal and interact with AI. For instance, and I know this is a little technical, but today most people interact with the global public platform of AI, which does have its problem because everything you are sharing is basically reused by the AI platform, whichever AI platform you use, whether it's ChatGPT or Gemini or any other, they are on a mission to kind of recycle everything you say. And of course, in the case of people with authorship, books, whatever, it's a real problem because you're basically diluting your IP by sharing too much of it. But we've learned, Bonnie and I have learned to master the creation of what are called custom GPTs or custom LLMs, which offer you a level of privacy that is extremely powerful because all of a sudden you can essentially look at putting your own work in complete confidence, if you will, and start questioning and using the AI to find patterns or maybe
linkages.
additional ideas that otherwise would be extremely difficult for you to do. I feel personally, I don't know how Bonnie feels, that I can produce probably 5 to 6 times the original content that I was able to do before. And as you get older, this idea of accelerating and making some of your birth process a little more efficient is very appealing.
So let me get this straight though. You're by putting in some of your writing to a customized AI.
Yep.
And I think Bonnie was talking earlier maybe about journal entries or dreams.
Yep.
This archival material of your own life and writing and creativity. So then you're getting a more personalized reflection back. Is that kind of what you're saying?
It's exactly that. And one of the way, and I think it's too loaded emotionally to think about that, is cloning yourself. And to some extent, that's how I started to see it, not because I don't want to be human anymore, but because I want help for digging deeper into some of the material that I have now produced over the last 30 years. And they were patterns and connections inside my books, inside my transcriptions of workshops and so on that I had never even considered. And so it became really obvious to me that this was going to be, that's why I like the word augmenting rather than artificial. I have really used, and I think Bonnie has as well, AI to augment my work, to augment my thinking, to augment my questioning of the issues that we're discussing today.
And if you found that, Bonnie, as well?
Yeah, I was just going to add, I think that for me, it really, if I can bring in an archetype here, it really is kind of a process of excavation. So I've always been a writer, always considered myself a writer since I think 5th grade when one of my teachers acknowledged an essay or something that I had written. And I really realized all the time that I was growing up that that was something that I loved to do. And so I have, vast amounts of writing that I have done over the course of my life. And particularly since I have done a lot of graduate work in this particular space, some of it would never see the light of day again, and particularly in the formats that it's in. But if I can feed that into AI and then ask it to build on a particular theme that I'm interested in and to draw from all of my different writings and maybe from readings and other things that I have done, it can really start to be this powerful mirror for us to not only put together some information that might help other people, but also a mirror to myself to augment my own process of self-exploration and transformation and being able to move into more of a spiritual, transcendent kind of consciousness that I am seeking in order to be able to better understand the world around me and also, of course, to be able to help others. And you had asked the question to Christophe a bit earlier about images and how to work with those. Well, of course, Jung always liked to talk about images as symbols. And a symbol is a living image, essentially. It's something that is a placeholder for something that is unconscious within us that we don't know about ourselves, but that we maybe need to know about ourselves. And so if you have a dream and in the dream you see a red fire engine, maybe that red fire engine has some information for you that might be super valuable. And so I like to use AI as a process of that excavation, of digging into sure, I can show up and ask the AI, what does what does that symbolize? And it might give me some information, the same way we can look up a dream book
Or
online or symbol book and see what
mm,
it means. But also to be able to have it look at my past, like I said, journal entries or my past dreams or even past papers and essays and things that I have written, it starts to take on this incredibly complex and sophisticated layering of different meanings that can be brought together in a way that when I'm sitting there looking at it and reading it,
yeah.
all of a sudden I start to get these revelations about myself and about how the world works and about how things are going for us, collectively. And of course, I do believe that we are collectively in for this initiation. I think that it is. And so the more of us that can understand how to work with AI in these ways, and I'm developing a process right now, which I won't say much about for some obvious reasons, but to be able to help people, to guide them in that process of actually interacting with AI in order to get it to divulge or identify some of those patterns that are at work in people's processes, especially around stories, personal stories, and what has happened to them. But we can also look at I don't know how many people watching this have seen the show The Foundation. It's a pretty fascinating sci-fi series. I can't remember what platform it's on right now, but at any rate,
Apple
there's
TV.
Apple TV. So there is a concept that they have developed in there called psychohistory, which is this idea of being able to collectively interpret and understand, predict how things are going to go, what's going to happen with humanity or in the universe. And I heard on a podcast just recently that there's also this capacity for retro history. This is an opportunity for us to be able to feed in some of the stories and the events and the understandings that we have about the past, but because of its predictive nature, for AI to actually be able to start filling in some of the blanks about what happened in our human history. And as you know, the history is always written by the winners of whatever battle was going on. And so we are missing an enormous amount
The
of what.
Battle of Hastings was 1066. That's the bit I remember from primary school. So it
Okay,
was always
good
about those
start.
battles.
And so I mean it's true. We know dates, right? We know general concepts about it. I mean, who
Mm,
won? I don't
mm.
know. I don't know that battle, but if we were to put AI on it and really start to use those pattern recognition capacities to look backward, what can it tell us about humanity and how we have evolved and why we are the way we are today, and what would be maybe a better way to organize our society and ourselves?
And maybe could we say ancestral history to a degree? You know,
Yeah.
the history of indigenous cultures, ancestral wisdom.
Very much. Yeah.
Mm,
Yeah, the time that I have spent with some Indigenous people, it has just been so profoundly obvious to me at what they lost with colonization. Their way of life with the rituals and the beliefs and the traditions and the tribal kinds of thinking and understandings and the symbolism, once again, coming back to nature. Nature is the greatest producer of symbols that we can ever possibly imagine. And what they have lost, what was taken away from them, being forbidden on many parts to even practice or speak their language or practice these rituals, is just so, so, so profound. So I
mm.
think that we do have also that capacity. We have to stay human. Well, some people might not choose that, but those of us who are trying our best to hold both sides of this and to really be able to maybe create a foundation, as Christophe was suggesting, to help other people do their work, to be able to face what's coming. I think we have the real capacity to also tap into that kind of understanding, as long as we are in our bodies, as long as we're working with symbols, as long as we are entering in whatever form it takes these kind of non-ordinary states of consciousness that's just not our everyday ego self that's just going through things. Anything can do that. Breath work can do that. Psychedelics can do that. Movement can do that. Being in somatic work can do that. Art can do that. There's a million different ways to do it, but we have to do it intentionally in order to be able to get the understanding that that brings us from a felt experience.
I was thinking, this picture behind from the tarot, the anima mundi, the soul of the world. It's in a way you could see AI if it's digging back into psychohistory or indigenous history or whatever. It's digging into the soul of the world that is alive, that cosmos. Uh, the world that has a soul. So that means we can dig back into that, which is probably different from what maybe some people, the way they would see it.
Mm. Yeah, maybe I can just suggest I had the opportunity a while ago, many years ago, to go to Belize to work on a Mayan site that was being excavated by archaeologists at the time. And it just really gave me the opportunity to understand as we uncovered as a team of archaeologists each one of those individual items that we found. They used to have a practice that we call today termination deposits. So archaeologists will find, usually at the bottom of a flight of stairs or someplace unusual, they will find lots of what are seemingly really valuable objects, and yet most of these are broken. And so there's all kinds of theories about why this might be. It's just their trash, and that's where they threw their trash when something was broken or whatever it was. But the way that I like to understand it, that is one of the common theories, is that actually these termination deposits were their capacity to do ritual. So that as their own society was collapsing, which it did around the year 1000 after being active for hundreds of years, that they made some kind of reference to that greater something that holds all of us, that could offer this allowing for us to be able to accept what's coming and to call on whatever forces we call on to be able to survive it and thrive in it. So I just think, the anima mundi, it's alive, it's real. Indigenous peoples know it, have known it for thousands and thousands of years. And we have largely, as Westerners, forgotten that. So, one of the really good ways, of course, for us to deal with all of this, the speed at which this is happening, the overwhelm which is coming, all of the job losses and all of the things that we're facing, energy crises, climate change, is to be in touch with nature, because that puts us in touch with soul. And the more
Mm.
that we can do that, the more we can provide rituals for ourselves to connect us to that greater force, then the more we can walk with a foot in both worlds of that, both the understanding of what's happening and holding that and going through it with intention, and also that, capacity to just be thrown completely off by the overwhelm and the speed at which things are happening.
Sometimes I think, I've been reading a little lately about Jung and the Red Book, and when he talks about the spirit of the times and the spirit of the depths, it's almost like the spirit of the depths. There's timeless things about having to confront your soul, your unconscious or whatever, and the spirit of the times maybe comes and goes, But it seems to me, apart from doing one's own work, if you want to put it that way, that the like what you're doing in Hawaii with this retreat, the need for shared ritual, it's kind of like the need for deep conversations where the soul is paramount or whatever, as Hillman might say. Um, they're also necessary because this addiction to screen time is also real, or I find it to be real. I mean, I need to get away from the screen. Not that I'm saying this is bad or, you know, uh, but it has to have a proportion in life.
Mhm.
And that the balance is kind of like A, the slow time, and then B, the conversational, ritualized uh, communitas of human beings. And I think that's where retreats and workshops are still such an important part of the whole thing.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, they can reconnect us like our indigenous ancestors did. Often they would wake up in the morning and say, okay, who had a dream? Let's talk about what that means for the tribe. So they really included that aspect of soul into everyday life, just as you were saying with Australian Aboriginals. That number that you offered, I have also heard that too, that 2/3 of their time, the way that I heard it was that 2/3 of their time was spent talking about dreams or talking about this other aspect of our lives. And so the more that we can be engaged with that, the easier it's going to be for us to be able to take what's coming. And I do think that the world is going to be thrown very off kilter. And of course, we have, there's two potential opportunities for what is going to happen here. We can really be headed into a dystopia, or we can really be headed into a utopia, which represents a little more, like, as you mentioned earlier, maybe if we have AI to take over a lot of the tasks that we are using or doing right now that are making us busy, then that will allow us more time to be able to drop more deeply into the things that inspire us, to listen to poetry or write poetry, to be able to do movement work or dance, to play a musical instrument, to have those deep conversations with family and loved ones that are around us. And the more of us that are able to do those kinds of things, the more we are able to make that meaning in our lives, because we are tapped into who we are and what we really need. We need that creative energy, that creative inspiration in our lives. And a lot of us get too busy to even be able to step aside and do that for a short while. It's so critical that we do that. So when we do retreats, we bring in all of that because we want to make sure that people are getting the felt sense of how they can actually hold all of this from a soul's perspective and be able to tap more deeply into why they are here on this planet, why this is happening now at this time on our planet. It's something that has never happened before in the history of humankind, as far as we know. Now, there may have been other, times before that, but why are we all here on this planet right now as souls? I really am of the school that believes that we chose to come here because we were consciousness before we came here, and we're going to be consciousness after we leave this planet in flesh and blood, and that we wanted to be here in order to be able to go through this massive shift that is coming for us right now. And again, we can choose two ways to do it. So I think that's been pretty clear throughout. But I hope that, our work together here in this place that is so magical. We work together on the Big Island of Hawaii, which has one of the few places in the world that has live volcanoes. And our volcano has been going off pretty regularly this year. And so I've had many opportunities to drive over and see that lava.
Is this a selling point?
Well, it could be. It could be. But, where I was going with that is we really respect and honor the greater forces that are holding all of us here. Here, the goddess of fire and the volcano is Pele. And I feel her presence all the time here, all the time in the land. And it's because I have done enough of my own inner work to understand how I fit into the bigger scheme of things. How, when I feel I'm challenged or I'm suffering, or when I see suffering in the world around me, which affects me quite dramatically, as it does, I think, most of us, until we find ways to distract ourselves or numb ourselves because it's just too much. So being able to be open to those greater forces and understanding our place in the world, if you will, everything is a system and we are contained. But if we don't feel that, then we can't have the benefit of it. And how do we feel it? By making that connection with ourselves.
And you're close to the primal force of nature, being close to the volcano, meaning, the lava, the deep lava. And with yourself, Christophe, I mean, with this retreat that is coming up, what else do you want to really say to the people that come along, or what is it that you're wanting to contribute?
I think the metta message, the message above the message, is still about discovering and embracing your soul vision. And that alone, for me personally, took decades. I was late, very late to the soul game, if we can call it that.
Yeah.
Because I was stuck in what is commonly referred to as materialistic science. For me, most of what you guys are talking about today was La La Land. It was the kind of conversation where I would either choose to exit or be very judgy about. And I felt until I decided and sort of forced, particularly with the COVID crisis, to confront my soul, more so than ever. I felt like I had missed on so many powerful conversations that could begin deep healing, um, not just emotional, but physical healing, beyond my wildest dreams. So that's what I describe as neuro-spiritual. I didn't feel the need to say no to all this science that I'm so passionate about, neuroscience, even though we're just scratching the surface of understanding the brain. We do have a much better idea of how certain mechanisms contribute to our ability to think, to compute, to suffer, and so on. But there was a huge part missing in my model, if you will, which was the spiritual model. Now, I tend to use spiritual more than soul, but ultimately, I feel that those two are intimately connected. But it was this newfound openness, this newfound plasticity that really, really helped me grow. And I can see now how AI is accelerating that and giving me new depth, new abilities to dig deep into that soul purpose. And that's really what I want to encourage others to do, to not, in a way, waste as much time as I have. And I'm sure I did it for good reasons. Obviously, it was my soul contract. But now my urge is to communicate that to people who are in deep suffering and often very, very confused, particularly youth. I have two young boys. I mean, they're adults, but here they are in this world where the kind of education that they've been told would be necessary is becoming obsolete. Where the idea of a future with opportunities is being clouded by everything they see on the news. I mean, there's so much information distortion, not to mention that even AI is contributing to some of that distortion. So it's very, very confusing. And that's why the work that you do, the work that we do, I think is even more important than we've ever thought before.
I remember when I first went to India, while you were talking, I was thinking, there was saying that everything is good, whatever's happened is accurate. Because in a way, you're like perfectly placed now to bridge between both. In this rite of passage that's happening, you are in such a good uh, uh, place of being able to talk about both things. So, I mean, it's to draw them together, to find the links. It's so good.
Yeah, and that's, by the way, your comment is triggering another thought that Bonnie and I talked quite a bit about during our retreats, and that is the opportunity today to integrate multiple discipline. We both, I think, openly consider ourselves polymath because our interests go far beyond psychology. They go into neuroscience, they go into personality science, quantum mechanics, which is not exactly the easiest field initially to jump into. But now with AI, we have the ability to really accelerate our understanding of core principles of quantum mechanics that are extremely important for people to understand, even in a basic way, so that we can begin to accept aspects of what we describe as reality that is quantum, and of course not available to our consciousness for the most part. So what I think is really extraordinary is, yet again, this augmentation process is to allow any human on this planet, including people in disenfranchised or underdeveloped countries have today the access to this enormous amount of knowledge that ultimately, I believe, will trigger new discoveries, new models of understanding the human journey.
Sometimes I think about it too. It's like, 200 years ago in the UK or whatever, if you came from a wealthy family, the elite, and you could go to Oxford or Eton or whatever, and you had access to a different
Yeah.
kind of information, whereas it's almost like, whilst you were saying that as well, I was thinking it's like an autodidact's gourmet now. It's like the access is there, or the polymath can delve into so many different areas to
That's
augment,
right.
as you're saying, their understanding or deepen it.
And of
It's
course, Jung
incredible.
wanted to do that too. He wanted to make psychology, as he was such a pioneer in the field, he wanted to draw from all of these other fields into psychology. He was
Which
into a
is what
lot of.
Eranos was as well.
Exactly. Yeah. So, in a way, it's a very archetypal idea. And it comes back to, if you focus on one thing and you're not open to those other kinds of things, or even know that they exist, then how can you draw the archetypal and metaphorical understandings that are there for you? I mean, that's one reason I love quantum mechanics, is because there are so many metaphors when we start looking from a psychological perspective that we can really apply in our own lives, and gives us a greater understanding of that.
And you were
Another
talking,
example of,
oh,
sorry,
sorry.
of that opening is, and we were having this conversation not too long ago about the number of divisions that exist in, in psychology, is also representing the number of walls that exist between fields of psychology. And I don't know what's your thought on that, John, but transpersonal psychology, for instance, as a field was ostracized, I guess we can say, but never accepted by the APA, whatever. Depth psychology, I think, has had its own challenges being recognized as a division. Media psychology, what is indeed my PhD, had, with pride, this title of being the 51st or 52nd, I forget. It's ridiculous. Why are we, defending these sort of framework as the truth, but only the truth? That is really an opportunity for implosion or explosion, as I see it.
I read something from James Hillman the other day where he was talking about his relationship with Jungian psychology and how he feels he picks things up and looks at them, and everyone will look at Jung in their own way, and I think that movement from the this is the one way, right way kind of idea to pick up different things and go deeply into them, let's say, with one's own.
Yeah, I think
Only
we're
way.
moving into cooking or gardening more than putting people into little boxes. And I think the hope I have is I can see young people not as afraid to do that than some of us. They have less to lose, I guess, than and probably no other option but to start integrating multiple disciplines at once.
And I
And
wanted
of
to
course, the
say,
education system, when I look at Johns Hopkins, as impressed as I am with their programs, they're going to struggle having this concentration in either engineering or medicine, because people cannot probably avoid thinking that spending $200,000 or $300,000 to become a doctor is going to pay off. In this day and age, it's very difficult to envision these kinds of investments being, worth the sweat and the money.
just going back to Bonnie for a second too, I think, in terms of the opening and the opening, whilst the opening seems to be such a great thing, it can also be an opening to the suffering of our times, can't it? And I think for me, I see this challenge and response of creativity as well. It's like if you're a writer, Bonnie, I don't know how you feel, but sometimes I get busy with other things and you don't write and you don't create or whatever. And I find, when I go back to writing, when I go back to that basic working with the material, that sometimes I go, oh, how come haven't been doing this for a week? Or it's like I need to create. It's how I
Mhm.
have to. Um, it's how I have to respond, and when you link that with that idea of service as well. So there's this idea of kind of going deeper into the soul and opening to the soul, but the creative just seems a very important part of it to me.
I think it's the foundation of our human existence. As beings, we are creative beings, and that is what we are here to do. So, most of us don't know how to do that because, again, we're so busy, or we have lots of restrictions, or we have lots of belief systems in place that suggest that we can't be. And a
Mm,
lot of people aren't even sure. I was not necessarily raised in a family that was very, I don't want to say creative because I'm sure they were, but there was not a lot of value necessarily placed on creativity and art. And in many ways, I think a bit like Christophe suggested, perhaps, I think I missed on a lot of opportunities and perspectives because of that lack of focus on creativity. Now, surely it did come out in some places, but if I was not as conscious of it as I am now, then I missed that opportunity really to be in relationship with myself. And the more that we fall into this, well, this is one thing we haven't talked about yet. So I'm going to go there in just a moment. But the more that we face AI and the changes that are happening, and right now, depending on who you listen to, they're saying it's doubling in capacity every 6 to 8 months. So there's just no way we're going to be able to keep up with things. And I think that systems will begin to dissolve because there's just no way that they can keep up. However, I'm aware, maybe from my work with culture collapse disorder, that this is going to get worse instead of better. I think humanity is in a very alchemical process right now where a lot of things are going to have to collapse or be dissolved in order for us to begin again from something, from the beginning. Something can rise up out of that. And
mm,
that something is absolutely our creativity. If we have the capacity to be able to, hold the fort for a while as things do begin to get even worse than they might be now and the way that we see them now, I think we're going to have to face the fact that probably we are going to achieve super intelligence in our lifetime. Now, that's not a word that any of the three of us have talked about here, but essentially, and Christoph maybe can speak more to that, but essentially, it is the idea and maybe the archetypal idea that there is going to be something bigger and smarter than humans. So the question is, what is that? And we have never, again, as a humanity, been in that position. We've always been the top dog. We've always been the ones to call the shots. We're destroying nature like crazy because of it. And yet we are going to have to face something that is going to collapse. And so creativity is the one thing that is going to be able to help save us as well, to be able to look at things from an innovative perspective. But first, we have to surrender to the process that is happening to us. In alchemy, we have to allow ourselves to be dissolved or crumbled or whatever that process is
yeah.
in
Or go
order
into
for
the
us to.
solution or dissolved, which is what you're
Exactly.
saying.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I don't know if either of you have something to add to that, but it's coming. And how we face it is going to be totally up to each one of us if we can manage to put ourselves in the right position with the right thought process to be able to understand what's going on. And I might say more about that in a bit, but I'm curious as to what Christoph thinks about super intelligence.
Um, First of all, I still question what we call intelligence, not just in the context of artificial intelligence, but there's really little consensus among experts what intelligence is. And so, if it is our capacity to solve problems, which is one way to look at it, it's true that we are witnessing there are new answers, new ways to understand or diagnose problems with AI that far exceed the speed and possibly the quality of our own capacity. But if it is way of holding multiple questions and seeing in ways that AI can't, intimate relationships between concepts that are still quite remote from each other, then maybe we will continue to evolve our own intelligence, so to speak, and not become obsolete. I just somehow was thinking about my own father for just a minute, who was a brilliant inventor and didn't have an education. And I witnessed for, his entire career, him building a very large company based on his ideas, which on paper didn't make any sense for most people. He constantly was either criticized or sometimes, mocked, that what was coming out of his brain was just not normal stuff, yet it was prodigious. I struggled with this notion that he could be that successful without education. So my first, opportunity was, I'm going to educate myself and have so many degrees that my poor father could never have. But I continue to, obviously see that his genius was pure and real, and that his own intelligence was not really a function of having been educated in a particular way. Maybe it was his soul. Maybe it was built in his DNA plus whatever soul contract or consciousness we receive at birth. So I'm still unsure how to define intelligence. And of course, at the same time, not exactly sure what super intelligence is at all.
I don't think anybody is.
Yes.
But, again, going back to the animal mundi, I like this idea that the world speaks. When you were talking about your father, it sounded to me like that originality. And definitely I could see that with my father in the country of Western Australia. It's almost like because he went off to the war when he was so young and missed education and all of that, he maintained that deep kind of intuitive originality or something. And the other thing I was thinking of, again, going back to Aboriginal Australia, is like the other forms of intelligence, the tracking, the ability to, like if someone gets lost in the, Gibson Desert in Australia, the first people are the Aboriginals um, to find that person. So there's an intelligence which is, what is it? On a different kind of level, working in a different kind of way and noticing different things. And that there is something, the synchronicity is suggesting something or some way in which the world speaks to us if we're prepared to be open and notice that or something.
Mm. And of course, that brings us directly into consciousness. And that's, again, another big word that maybe not everybody can agree on the definition of it. But in quantum physics, they talk about how we are basically existing in a field of consciousness, which means that everything in the universe is essentially conscious because we are part of that field. And I really like that idea. And I don't think that we can be creative if we are not connected. I mean, of course, we're always all connected to that field, but if we don't have consciousness about what that is that's being pulled out of us or that is bubbling up from within us, if we don't feel that capacity and drive to make time for creativity, to make connections with other people where some kind of collaboration can happen and something bubbles up out of that, then of course, creativity becomes a lot more dumbed down in many ways. What happens is it's rote. It's what AI is doing now. It's taking fragments from every single thing that it's ever been fed and putting it back together in the form of a song or a picture or something like that. But it doesn't come from the soul. It doesn't come from consciousness. And so I do think that this ability for us as humans to be conscious in the way that we are and to be creative in the way that we can is always going to distinguish us and is going to serve us in being much more happy and free as things move forward.
Well, I'm thinking maybe that's a good place to, unless, Christophe, have you got something to
No, I like
add
what
to
Bonnie
it?
just said, and part of my last words, if you will, on the topic is, while we do see how AI is depicted mostly as a threat to humanity, it may well be not a threat, but the best opportunity humanity has had to truly wake up. And I, at least for now, I'm holding that hope.
Yeah, that's good. And, I noticed that, on the news feed a few days ago that Elon Musk was talking about, what is it, the universal income or the
Yeah.
guaranteed income or whatever. But
Basic income.
Yeah.
Yeah.
it's been an idea that's been around for a while, but I think this thing of having the time to really go into, which is what I would call again, the technology of the sacred, or becoming conscious as well as what Bonnie's calling it. But having time to work with the material, it could be such a blessing for so many people.
Totally. Yeah. Is holding that, idea and that intention that we are moving toward a great awakening of humanity so that we can stop destroying the planet and each other and stop the massive suffering that we're experiencing. I mean, look at it this way. If AI is able to help us to abolish all of these diseases that have been just so devastating for humanity and the rest of the planet, imagine what can happen. We can have that freedom to live out our lives maybe for a much longer time than we have in the past. And if that is dedicated toward compassion and creativity and empathy and service and collaboration and helping each other and being of service in many ways, it's going to be a completely different experience for humanity as a whole. I truly believe that can happen. And so, that's the part that I'm holding. I think that that's the part that we are offering for others to learn more about how to hold when they come to retreats and attend podcasts or webinars and things like that. And don't forget, however, we all have to be embodied in this. We have to spend time bodies. We cannot lose touch with that. We have to work with things as symbols. And of course, we have to seek out what is our own meaning. Who are we really beneath the surface of that ego self? And I think that that's something that is going to be very, very powerful as we move forward.
I'm just looking for something. Unfortunately, I just don't know whether I can find it, but it was James Hillman talking about something Brian Eno said, because he was talking, he was saying about Hermes, that Hermes is just a messenger. He doesn't worry about what information he brings. There is this other side to it. Hermes was a thief and a trickster or whatever. But he also mentioned that something Brian Eno said. He said that the problem with computers is that there's not enough Africa in rhythm, body, ritual, and that kind of resonated with me, that we still need so much of it.
Yeah, beautiful.
Anyway, I'd like to thank you both very much for sharing your explorations and your delvings into this area. And I'm going to put up, if you have links and everything to what you're doing, then we'll put that up when this goes out. But I want to thank you very much.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much for inviting us.